All right, welcome. Today, we're going to do something that might feel a little strange, maybe even unnatural. We're going to take our own conscious experience, something we normally just live, and we're going to put it under a microscope. Now, why would we do that? Well, because the way we usually think about ourselves and the world might actually be hiding the most fundamental truths about how we experience reality. Our goal here is to dissect that experience, to reveal its hidden structure.
So let's start with a question that sounds incredibly simple, but trust me, it's profound. Picture this. You're looking at an apple tree. What are you really experiencing in that moment? And I don't mean the physics of it, light hitting your retina. I mean, what is the raw, direct, lived content of that experience? This is exactly where phenomenology begins, by hitting the pause button on all our usual explanations and just looking very, very closely at the experience itself.
Now, for most of us, the answer seems obvious, right? There's me, the thinking, conscious subject, kind of located inside my head. And then there's the tree, a physical object existing completely separately out there in the world. This clean split is what the philosopher Husserl calls our natural attitude. It's basically our mental default setting. But to do phenomenology, we have to temporarily put that belief on hold. We're not going to ask if the tree is real or not. We are just going to analyze the structure of what it's like to experience the tree.
So here's our game plan for this little dissection. We're going to follow 5 key steps. We'll start with the absolute foundation of all experience. Then we'll make our first cut, separating the 2 core parts of any conscious act. After that, we'll see how the mind cleverly puts them back together. And finally, we'll really get why Husserl thought of all this as a brand new kind of science.
Okay, let's dive right in. This first principle of phenomenology, it's probably its most famous insight, and it completely reframes that simple subject-object picture we were just talking about. This, right here, is Husserl's foundational insight, and you can try it for yourself right now. Can you be conscious, but conscious of nothing at all? It's literally impossible. We often think of consciousness as this kind of box or container that things pop into, but Husserl says, no, that's totally wrong. Consciousness is way more like a spotlight. By its very nature, it is always directed at or aimed towards something.
This essential directedness has a technical name, intentionality. Think of it as the aboutness of your mental life. Your perception is about the tree. Your memory is about your first car. Your judgment is about a political issue. For Husserl, this isn't just some feature of consciousness, it is consciousness. It's the unbreakable bridge that links what we call the subject and the object from the very start.
Okay, now here's where the analysis gets really, really interesting. Because it turns out that every intentional act, every single moment of being conscious of something, isn't just one simple thing. It actually has a twofold structure. We can analyze it from 2 different but perfectly connected sides.
Let's start with the side of the experience that feels most familiar to us, the subjective side, the me that's doing the seeing, the remembering, the judging. Husserl calls this subjective side the noesis. It's the active flowing process of the mind itself. It's not a thing, it's an act. So in our tree example, it's the perceiving of the tree, or the remembering of a tree from your childhood, or the judging that the tree looks healthy. It's the dynamic mental how of the experience. Okay, now we're flipping to the other side of the coin, and I really need you to focus here, because this is the most important and frankly, the trickiest concept in our whole analysis today. This is the idea of the noema.
So what on earth is the noma? Well, it is the tree, but, and this is absolutely key, it is not the physical hunk of wood and leaves out there in the world. It is the tree precisely as it appears to you in your experience. You could call it the perceived tree. It includes the angle you're seeing it from, the way the light hits it, the feeling it gives you. If you imagine that same tree tomorrow, you'll have an imagined tree. That's a totally different noma. As Husserl famously said, the real tree can burn to the ground, but the meaning of that tree, the remembered tree, can't. The noma is the object's sense within the experience.
This slide here just lays out that perfect connection. You can see how every noesis, every subjective act, has its own corresponding noema. The act of perceiving points towards the perceived object. The act of judging is aimed at a judged state of affairs. The takeaway is simple. You can never, ever have one without the other. They are 2 inseparable sides of a single moment of consciousness.
But this perfect correlation brings up a really fascinating puzzle. Think about it for a second. Your mental acts, your noeses, they're a constant flow, right?
You glance at the tree, then you focus on a single leaf, then you remember climbing a different tree as a kid. And with every one of those acts, the noma, the tree as it's intended, it shifts. So the question is, if everything is in flux, how is it that you experience one single, identical, stable tree over time?
The answer lies in this really remarkable power of the mind that Husserl calls synthesis. This is the mental work that allows us to build a unified, stable world out of this constant stream of conscious moments.
Synthesis is the act of work our mind does, usually totally unconsciously, to weave together all these shifting perspectives. It takes this flowing multiplicity of experiences and it binds them all together, creating one stable object. That object, our tree, becomes what Husserl calls a pole of identity, a single what that we recognize as the very same thing through all of our different glances and memories and thoughts.
And this slide just lays out that whole process perfectly. So, step 1, we have a constant flow of subjective acts, our noesis. Step 2, this flow generates a continuous series of different perspectives, the noemata. But, and here's the magic, our mind doesn't just see a chaotic slideshow of disconnected images. No, it actively synthesizes them, and in doing so, it creates a stable pole of identity, the one tree that we recognize as the same object over time.
So after all this complex lingo, noesis, noema, synthesis, we land on the big question. And I know this is on your minds, especially if you think of science as something that happens with test tubes and particle accelerators. What is the point? How can any of this possibly be called a science?
Well, the answer is actually very simple. For Husserl, this rigorous descriptive analysis we've just been doing, that is the science of phenomenology. It's not a causal science trying to explain why things happen. It's a descriptive science that maps out the essential structures of how things can appear to us in the first place. See, unlike physics, which wants to explain the world with causal laws, or psychology, which might look at the neurological basis of perception, phenomenology is a descriptive science. Its goal is to describe the universal, necessary structures of any possible experience. It describes how a world can even appear to a subject at all.
And this is why it matters so much. Every single science, from physics to biology, is ultimately built on the world as we experience it. Before you can have a theory about reality, you first have to have an experience of reality. So by returning to the things themselves, phenomenology doesn't try to replace the other sciences. It actually tries to provide a solid foundation for them, letting us investigate the very ground on which all of our other knowledge is built. Which brings us to a final and, I think, pretty provocative thought. We spent all this time just dissecting the simple experience of looking at a tree. But what if we applied this same rigorous method to our entire inner world? What's the essential structure of joy, or regret, or the incredibly complex experience of empathy, of understanding another person's consciousness? What phenomenology offers us is a toolkit to turn our own minds into a new kind of frontier for scientific exploration.